In this video, we will explore the Kabbalistic tree of life, one of the more interesting and obscure symbols in this sphere of potential knowledge. No other symbol has been so heavily decorated with the ideas, motifs, and concepts from other systems and unbridled imaginations. The tree of life diagrams we find in any internet search represent a kind of ideological Christmas tree upon which any conceivable set of ideas are hung, and many people believe that it can and should be used exactly in this way. I am not one of them. The historical origins of the tree of life diagram disappear into obscurity very quickly. It first appeared in a public forum early in the 16th century, and we can scarcely find a trace of it before then. The ideological roots of Kabbalistic knowledge, however, are said to stretch far back into antiquity, to the mythical Garden of Eden, and have endured through different streams of Jewish religious practice and knowledge ever since. It is claimed that this sphere of knowledge was commonplace amongst the Jewish people 1,000 years before Christianity emerged, but it was hidden to protect it from successive invasions and occupations by unsympathetic foreign forces. As mentioned previously, there is a vast body of Jewish knowledge in this realm that remains closely guarded and will never enter the public realm, and the little that escapes inevitably becomes mixed with all kinds of other subjective material in such a way that the wheat is often difficult to separate from the chaff. Nevertheless, I am comfortable that this diagram represents something of a legitimate body of knowledge that is unknown or barely known to us, because the diagram template is relatively unchanged from when it was first published, and the small additions made since by individuals such as Kircher, whose amazing artworks we explored in Section 1, only deepen the connection to the knowledge we have already discussed. So we will strip away all the adornments which only serve to fuel imagination and befuddle, and instead explore the tree of life diagram from the ground up, using the tools of discernment we have discovered. The tree of life concept is of Judeo-Christian origin, and we find it mentioned by name in the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis, the book of Proverbs, and the last book of the New Testament, Revelation. It is also mentioned in passing elsewhere in the Bible. The tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil are best viewed as two faces of the same coin. Both were central in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve actually ate from neither of them until a serpent persuaded them to eat from the tree of knowledge. After Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, God said, according to Genesis 3:22, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat, and live forever." So it is interesting that Adam and Eve never ate from the tree of life, although it was available to them, or alternatively, that they ate from it, but it had no significance until after the point where they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In either case, this point is worth exploring. The tree of knowledge of good and evil speaks of the individual in a fallen state, of antagonistic binary opposites, separation from unity and wholeness. In the Genesis allegory, Adam and Eve descended into the dualist reality. If we recall from Section 1, the third or reconciling force of the triad is represented by Jesus, integrating the binary opposites, heaven and earth, God and man. Psychologically, according to Jung and the sayings of the Apostle Thomas, the anima and animus need to be integrated. So the consequence of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil was enmity between man and woman, disintegration. We might then visualize a tree of knowledge of good and evil as consisting of two pillars, with the third central integrating pillar missing, representing the bifurcated psyche, the dualist perspective, the rift between God and humanity, between man and woman, the anima and the animus. The tree of life is represented by the same schematic, but the added central pillar provides a means to work towards integrating these opposites, to master disparate aspects of self, to psychospiritually develop. The tree of knowledge shows the consequences of descent into the material realm, while the tree of life shows the path of ascent, the path of psychospiritual evolution through one's own efforts. This work is difficult and onerous by design. It is not so easy as to pluck ready-made fruit from the tree of life, and so, according to the Genesis allegory, God created the sword-wielding cherubim to prevent easy access, and made Adam and Eve cultivate the soil from which they had been formed, that is, to work on themselves. For this reason, we sometimes find the idea in religious texts that an ascended man is worth much more than an angel. An angel is given consciousness. The ascended man earned it for himself. Likewise, eating from the tree of life mattered not before the fruit caused the fall of humanity into dualism. The 12 labours of Hercules is another myth that captures the idea of overcoming great obstacles to earn our place in heaven or amongst the gods. The hymn of the pearl, which we admired in section 1, is another. It describes by allegory the descent of the angelic soul, a boy angel if you like, into the material world. He must, for this journey, leave behind the apparent riches and fine clothing of heaven, because these were given to him. He did not earn them himself. He can only earn his place in heaven again by remembering himself, a practice deemed central in Gurdjieff's teaching and emphasized in this hymn, by stealing the pearl which represents higher consciousness from the dragon who guards it. A quite similar idea to the 10th of 12 tasks set to Hercules, stealing the golden apples that grew in the garden of Hesperides, which was guarded by a 100-headed dragon, or the tree of life in Eden, guarded by the cherubim. Returning to the hymn of the pearl, upon remembering himself and attaining higher consciousness by his own efforts, the boy can ascend to heaven and earns the right to those things that were formerly given to him. This is because to have any meaning or value, consciousness, in the esoteric religious sense, cannot be given. If it is given, it can also be taken away. In order for it to have any real value or meaning, in order for it to belong to us, it must be earned. This idea is also often emphasized in Gurdjieff's teachings. This reminds me of another meaty expression of Gurdjieff's. He said, "I have leather, good leather, but you have to make your own shoes." The Tree of Life diagram then, like the Hymn of the Pearl, illustrates the descent of the angelic soul into the world in which we find ourselves, losing first objective consciousness, then subjective consciousness, and finally entering the fallen state of antagonistic binary opposites. We find many other examples of trees given significance in ancient cultures, but little, if any, descriptions to inform us of their meaning. Sometimes we find very close visual representations of the modern tree of life, such as this one from the 11th century AD. The first modern diagrammatic representation of the tree of life appears in Joseph Gicatilla's Gates of Light in the year 1566. The diagram was designed in circa 1516 by Paolo Riccio, a true Renaissance man with a passion for Greek and Jewish language, philosophy and knowledge, in consultation with other peers of this sphere. Although there is another contemporaneous work of the late 16th century known as the Sefer Etz Hayim by Isaac Luria, which does a much better job of illustrating the basic fundamental ideas of the Kabbalistic tree of life. Riccio's diagram has 10 spheres or sephiroth connected by 17 lines or paths. Further iteration has led to a diagram with 22 paths rather than 17. But it was Kirsch's wonderful illustration in Oedipus Egypticus, circa 1655, that gave us the modern design of the Kabbalistic tree of life, still in use today. An alternative representation with an extra sephiroth implied in the diagrams of Kircher, Isaac Luria and others was added not long after. And so today we find two popular modern diagrams representing the tree of life. Both have 22 paths, but one has 10 sephiroth, the other 11. We will explore the diagram with 11 sephiroth as it most closely connects by ideology, philosophy and design to the knowledge we are now familiar with, as well as the ideology of the Kabbalah itself. The tree of life is arranged on 3 pillars, representing manifestations of the 3 forces. Accordingly, Kabbalistic ideology refers to them as the pillar of severity, the pillar of mercy, and the pillar of balance. The sephiroth on the left are, for illustrative purpose, assigned a negative charge, and they are appropriately designated as feminine. Those on the right are positively charged in accordance with the material we have already discussed, are masculine. And finally, the central pillar and its sephiroth represent the manifestation of the neutralizing force. So we might expect the numbering to be in complete accordance with the numbering system and the colours we have assigned to those numbers for visual clarity, to be in accordance with those made in the tetragrammaton of Jewish mysticism. But this is not entirely the case. The lower 7 sephiroth are in complete accordance, but the upper 3 are not. This is due to an early distortion and perfectly illustrates what happens when potentially genuine esoteric knowledge enters the public domain. So what happened to the numbering of the upper 3 sephiroth? Early versions of the Tree of Life were unnumbered, and since the diagram represents a flow from top to bottom, it is natural to expect that the first sphere will be numbered 1. This is logical, but unfortunately a product of ideological carelessness and incorrect. The first sephiroth is known as Keter. It represents a triad godhead. The 3-part name of God associated with Keter and revealed to Moses from the burning bush is Echye, Asher, Echye. Recalling material from section 1, we discovered for anything to exist, 3 things must exist. This idea is carried by the peripheral Kabbalist idea of the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof Or, which are analogous to the 3 forces and manifest through Keter. So the triad godhead Keter must be assigned the number 3. To be consistent with its own ideology, Chokmah must carry the symbolic number of 1, since a vast body of literature about Chokmah repeatedly associates the number 1 and the masculine with it. The next sephiroth, the feminine Binah, must then be assigned the number 2, and Dart should carry the number 3, since Dart is described as a reflection of Keter or interchangeable with Keter. We need to take note that we have changed nothing essential about the Kabbalistic tree of life itself in doing this, except to correct the numerical associations given in the upper 3 sephiroth. As a result, we bring it into accordance with the rest of the numbering of the Kabbalah, which is in accordance with the tetragrammaton of Jewish mysticism, as well as the system's own ideology. Having addressed that, we can move on to other interesting design aspects of this diagram. The tree of life is divided into 4 sections from top to bottom, exactly in accordance with the principles we have already discussed in previous videos. Below the tripart godhead Keter, we find the uppermost triad of Sephiroth. This is the intellectual triad, consisting of Chokmah, which represents wisdom, Dart, which represents knowledge, and Binah, which represents understanding. Immediately below, the next 3 Sephiroth form the emotional triad, comprising Gevurah, which represents strength, Tiphareth, which represents beauty and truth, and Chesed, which represents loving kindness. The three Sephiroth below these form the triad of practical movement or activity. These consist of Netzach, which represents endurance and victory, Hod, which represents glory, and Yesod, which represents the material world's foundation in movement, a concept we have addressed previously. The lowest Sephiroth is known as Malkuth and represents a body and or materiality and or the causal world or creation. These divisions and their ordering are entirely consistent with those we have already explored in the tetragrammaton, in the zodiac template and the placement of the four gospel writers, and those we found in numerology, the enneagram symbol, in the three kinds of man, and the three ways towards psychospiritual evolution described by Gurdjieff, and also his description of psychological centers. Accordingly, in Jewish Kabbalistic tradition, there are three corresponding forms of approaching this pool of knowledge: the theoretical or theosophical Kabbalah, the ecstatic or emotional Kabbalah, and the practical Kabbalah. These divisions also correspond with certain Eastern religious ideologies in terms of progressive psychospiritual development, where mastery of the body through movement and arresting movement is a preliminary work towards obtaining subjective consciousness or self-awareness, which is said to be emotional in character, and finally objective consciousness or full realization, which is said to be intellectual in character. Often we find this idea framed as density or popular New Agey terms like vibration, and the same order is given. The least dense and highest vibration is the intellect, then the emotions, then activity or movement, and finally the corporeal body. Let me reiterate in closing that in almost all the modern diagrams depicting the Kabbalistic tree of life, we find luminous examples of what happens over time when genuine esoteric knowledge passes into the public forum, and through time, the fundamentally important ideas, like those we have touched on here, fragment and fade away into obscurity. They become so distorted through imagination and invention, and decorated with erroneous ideas, that they soon become unrecognizable. As mentioned, it is always going to be difficult to sort the wheat from the chaff along any lines, but perhaps the ideas we have explored in these videos, which will coalesce into something very interesting and useful later in this series, may help in your exploration. I would like to leave you with this very interesting allegorical tree of life description as a segue to the videos to follow. From Revelation 22, verse 2. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street, and on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each month having a different fruit. Thanks for listening.